Today, I decided to do a video on the lack of understanding that victims endure regarding friends and family and what the victim is going through. So hi everyone, my name is Deanna King and this channel is All Talk Narcissism and Codependency. And before we begin, if you like any of these videos, please like, subscribe, share, and or comment, as this not only helps me, but it helps get the word out on these abusers. So that being said, let's talk. When it comes to narcissistic abuse, people do not get it. They don't understand what a person is going through and they deem it as minimal. They don't see abuse unless your body is colored in black and blue bruises. But make no mistake, this abuse is just as detrimental. The attitude that the victim will get from others is that it takes two to tango. People believe that it's just the two personalities that are clashing and you're both to blame in this. You're both adding fuel to the fire. And I suppose if you're breathing, that constitutes as adding fuel. Sarcasm here. Then again, others just see it as you being involved with an unreasonable person. No more, no less. But regardless of how it's viewed through the lens of outside sources, you are at fault for staying in the relationship, and all you need to do is end this relationship. But people are unaware of the consequences that leaving a narcissist can entail, and so leaving is not as easy as one may think. There's the physical aspect to contend with, and there is the psychological aspect. So the belief is that if they stay, it mustn't be so bad, or the victim is merely playing the role of victim and attention seeking. And here you are needing so desperately to talk about it, but on top of being rejected and discarded by your partner, you're also being discarded by the outer world, intentional or not. You are left entirely alone to deal with this. This abuse is so much more serious than people think. The person who already has been traumatized in childhood, again, intentionally or not, has an extremely hard time drawing a line in the sand. They've been conditioned to believe that they have no say in anything. They have no voice. They were taught to believe that saying no means that they are being hurtful toward another by denying someone else's wants. Saying no makes them bad. Saying no makes them unlovable and unloved. Time and time again, they have been disapproved of every time they wanted to set a boundary. When you're taught to never say no, what you're also being taught is to never say yes to you. And so you deny your own true self. So now this person grows up feeling that they do not have permission to want, because if they do, there will be consequences to that. They're conditioned to believe that they're bad. So when a person ends up getting involved with a narcissist, which is often the case, they most definitely get repercussions. And these people who end up with narcissists have attracted them in their lives because of how they felt growing up. We attract circumstances to both how we think and how we feel. So if you're made to feel that you don't deserve good, you attract the same thing. So yes, healing is important. It's the programming that has to be changed. So what ends up happening within the relationship is the person who has already been traumatized as a child now becomes re-traumatized. They become paralyzed in so many other areas of their lives also. They are in freeze response. The way the mind works regarding programming is when a person is in a high state of emotion like fear or tears, messages received in those moments get easily downloaded into the subconscious mind, and now the person believes the messages. If they're told that they were stupid or that they'll never amount to anything, even though the conscious mind rejects it, the subconscious mind accepts it as truth. And it doesn't just have to be words. It can be the parent who was distracted and never had time for you. You weren't acknowledged. And so your subconscious mind was programmed to believe that you just weren't enough or lovable or deserving or all of the above. So if the victim already feels these feelings, which most times they do, they will now experience these beliefs at an even deeper level with the narcissist re-traumatizing them. That unhealed wound will deepen, making it even harder for them to leave. Victims of narcissists are more often than not quite intelligent, but even so, trauma upon trauma will lead to these deep-seated beliefs that somehow they just aren't enough and they'll never make it on their own and no one else will want them. And so they often just give up the fight and remain in the chaos, trying to survive. And then there's the self-hate and the shame that they feel for putting up with this level of treatment from another. I'd like to talk about some of the experiences or end results the victim goes through in these situations with narcissists. There are 5 actually that I'd like to address today. Number 1 is isolation. There is the isolation from the abuser and there is the self-isolation from the victim. With the abuser, this tactic is used to take control over the victim, where the victim no longer has agency over their own lives. Those who don't experience abuse often take for granted the little things like going for a drive on a sunny day or taking a walk with a friend. It's these little things that make up a life. But the victim doesn't get that, doesn't get to enjoy these things. The narcissist will manipulate the narrative with things like always being around if the victim has friends over. The victim feels monitored. The friends feel uncomfortable. Eventually, the friends will stop coming around via the choice of the victim or friends. They'll also create isolation with family members with things like telling the victim that their family is less than nice to them when they're not looking, and so conflict begins. Other tactics in isolating the victim is to find a way to ruin their vehicle or convincing them that a one family vehicle is a better way to go. So the victim ends up being at the mercy of the narcissist to go anywhere. This isolation is designed to keep the victim away from others so that the victim won't hear opinions of the abuser's behavior with the intention of keeping them at bay. In the isolation, they can manipulate using jealousy tactics and guilt to prevent their partner from meeting anyone new and leaving eventually. So with all these tactics, the victim ends up isolated and trapped. And along with this taking place, there's huge doses of brainwashing that occurs as they use the victim's weaknesses to their advantage. An abused person can often self-isolate on their own because it becomes a way to self-protect. When a person feels unsupported by not only the perpetrator, but the outside world, they learn to survive by crawling into a safe shell where they can create their own world of studying or doing artwork or writing, things like that. They'll stay busy in order to not feel the pain that they feel inside or to prove to themselves that they have worth. So then they become workaholics more often than not. It feels safer in that world because that way they aren't risking being rejected, shamed, or judged. But regardless of whether it's isolation from the partner or self-isolation, the victim remains in a shell to avoid further conflict or traumatic experiences like being yelled at, verbally abused, or given the silent treatment. Number 2 is mistrust. The victim of narcissistic abuse through constant brainwashing loses all trust in self and their ability to make the right decisions. And like I said at the beginning, when a person is put into an emotional state, the messages received by the abuser are downloaded into the subconscious mind where it becomes a reality for said victim. If they're constantly being put into a distress state with high cortisol levels running through them, the negative messages create mistrust of self in that person. They no longer trust that they can make it in the world on their own. They no longer believe that they can survive without the abuser. They don't trust that they can make the right decisions. And that one is huge. They don't even trust that the terrible thing that the narcissist has done to them is reason enough to end the relationship. The victim lives in a constant state of fear. They also don't trust that anyone would ever want them or that leaving the relationship would even lead to a better life. So they stick with the known, trying to find ways to not only cope, but survive. Even if on the conscious level, they know that none of these beliefs are truths, the subconscious mind has its own download, which is what prevails. They may believe here up in their head that they deserve better, But down deep in the heart, what they feel is the opposite. And I'm referring to the subconscious mind here. Within them, they feel worthless and not enough. It's quite a duality. And when you are faced with all these conflicts, it makes it pretty hard, almost impossible to leave. The third thing that I want to mention is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is how we are left feeling when our beliefs or values are in opposition to other beliefs or actions. Often, in order to get relief from the dissonance, the brain, in search of feeling better, will use rationalization. It is a coping mechanism. An example of cognitive dissonance in living with an abuser could be that the narcissist comes home and yells at the partner because the partner has reminded them to put their shoes away, as per requested by the narcissist the day before in a conversation about not leaving shoes at the door, where the narcissist asked to be reminded. The victim defends, reminding them that this is what they asked for. The abuser yells back in disdain, telling them that they need to leave them a minute before being bombarded with demands, leaving the victim to feel shame and guilt. Now, as much as being yelled at like that was unacceptable, the victim tells themselves that perhaps the other is right, although they're upset, but they still tell themselves that next time they'll wait a few seconds before speaking. Victims of abuse are stuck between wanting to keep the relationship in hopes that things will change eventually because the truth of what's actually taking place is too painful to experience. It's painful because of childhood traumas and abandonment in some form or another. That wound has yet to be healed. Now here they are walking around with an open, unhealed wound, and in walks the narcissist to reopen that wound deeper. Cognitive dissonance leaves a person constantly second-guessing their decisions because they're filled with doubt. And they can also be the ones often apologizing for the very thing that the narcissist should be apologizing for. Number 4, C.P.T.S.D. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental disorder. It is a response to repetitive exposure to traumatic experiences, leaving the person feeling high levels of anxiety, along with feelings of guilt and shame, often not even knowing what it is they're supposed to be ashamed of. They feel like failures. They feel helpless because they have learned helplessness from these abusers. They feel worthless. Their sense of self is distorted or non-existent. They have a tough time regulating their emotions. They are also hypervigilant, waiting for the shoe to drop. They feel an overall sense of terror on a daily basis. And number 5, last one, depression. Depression affects sleep, which affects serotonin, which affects dopamine, and a slew of other hormones. When a person no longer sees the light of day, they cannot see a way out of their situation. And like I said in the beginning, most people don't understand that their friend or sibling is being abused. And so they are alone when they most need someone to talk to that would greatly help them acknowledge what they're going through because of all the cognitive dissonance that they're experiencing. So now, because no one understands, nor even tries to, they further isolate to avoid the shame others place on them, intentionally or unintentionally. Shame and judgment for not standing up for themselves, which drives them even deeper down the rabbit hole where suicide can become an option. Being in a narcissistic relationship is a serious matter. Today, I've touched base with some areas on how these people are experiencing life, and I haven't even touched base on the ways these abusers threaten to take everything from the victim if the victim leaves. And with narcissism on the rise as time goes by, I'm hoping more and more people will come to understand this, not only the victims, but family members and friends. For the victim, though, I say keep on keeping on. Where there's a will, there's a way, and you are not alone. So keep on researching, keep looking for the light, because for those who seek, find. That is all for today, and hopefully it has brought some clarity to some of you. Victims of narcissistic abuse need your support, and support looks like acknowledgement, not judgment. Food for thought. Bye for now.